Hey everyone, I'm Aaron Ju, EFF's Director of Member Engagement, and welcome to our second EFF30 Fireside Chat. For 30 years, the Electronic Frontier Foundation has advocated for your digital privacy, security, and free speech rights. To celebrate, we're hosting this series of conversations looking back at some of the biggest issues in internet history and how they've shaped the modern web. In the spotlight today is Section 230 and the future of free speech online. We're saving the final portion of today's program for you, so please drop your questions into chat throughout the discussion. We'll collect them, and guests today will answer as many as they can. So now I am pleased to welcome today's esteemed guests. That's EFF Legal Director, Dr. Corynne McSherry, and Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, who was an original framer of Section 230. Thank you both for being here, and please take it away.
All right. Well, welcome to everyone in the audience. We're really excited to have this conversation, and I am personally incredibly excited to be able to have this conversation with Senator Wyden, who I hope people in the audience know has been a real hero for digital rights. Just on issue after issue after issue, he has stood with internet users in really important ways. And one of those ways was by helping to create Section 230, which is one of the legal pillars of the internet. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to start us off by just clearing some ground, because one of the things that happens...
Good luck with that.
Well, Senator Wyden, one thing you know for sure is that there's an incredible amount of confusion about what Section 230 even is. So let me throw out a definition and see if we can get everybody on the same page, and then I'll sort of invite you in to add on to it. But I think it actually is kind of a simple thing at the end of the day. Section 230 simply says that internet services aren't legally on the hook for things that their users do online. It's not unlimited, so it doesn't apply, for example, to federal criminal law or federal criminal claims. No protection there. It doesn't apply to internet services' own actions and speech. Right? It doesn't apply when they're the speakers, when they're the actors. They can't look to Section 230 for protection. It's only for things that their users do. And so it's sort of a simple common sense kind of policy, which is if I go online and I post something illegal, I should be the one who's held responsible for it. Not, for example, the message board or the social media platform or whatever where I posted it, or the person who forwards it or retweets it. I'm responsible for my own speech. And this is important because without Section 230, right, the internet would be a very, very different place. And it's not just that we wouldn't have Facebook and Twitter, we wouldn't have Wikipedia or the Internet Archive, or your local newspaper wouldn't be able to have a comment section, and so on. And I think people don't always realize how many different kinds of services rely on Section 230. And then just one other thing that Section 230 does is it protects content moderation. It makes it possible for a social media platform to make decisions about and make choices about what content it wants to host and what content it doesn't want to host. Social media platforms, but also, again, blogs, newspapers, libraries, any kind of service that might host content generated by somebody else, they depend on Section 230. Now, I know you know this, Senator Wyden, because you helped write this bill. But it seems like a lot of other people don't, including like the New York Times, which is really hard for those of us who are working in this space. So I wonder if you could, tell us a little bit. Again, you're the person who wrote this bill. What were your motivations behind it? Take us back to the origins of this incredibly important law. What were you thinking then? And could you have imagined how important it was going to be later?
You stole most of my initial material, Corynne. Let me, if I might, just offer up a couple of quick thoughts in addition, and then we'll go talk about the history.
Sure.
There has been so much bloviating about Section 230 over the last couple of years that when I heard EFF was going to do this program, I said, hallelujah, this is a chance to set the record straight. If there's one sentence that I believe we want to communicate about this law, It is that Section 230 says that the person who creates the content is the one who is responsible for it. Period. Full stop. And as you noted, and certainly critics think otherwise, you're not getting off the hook in terms of federal criminal law. Federal criminal law applies to you just like it does to everybody else. Two other points. Section 230 protects the ability of individual users to be heard, and especially people who don't own their own TV stations. This has always been for the person who doesn't have deep pockets. And for example, I feel very strongly without 230, a lot of the injustices dealing with Black Lives Matter would not have come to light. And it's my view, based on our research, that not a single Me Too post accusing powerful people of wrongdoing would be allowed on a moderated platform without Section 230. So from the start, and this is, I think, particularly relevant, you asked about the history. When Congressman Chris Cox and I sat down to think about putting this together, it was always to be about innovators and people without power and clout and people who couldn't afford to be all tied up in litigation from powerful interests that were just trying to sideline their ideas. And Chris was our star lawyer. He was thinking about all the prodigy cases. And remember, he and I had a different kind of slant than people who just wanted to stop pornography, which was a big part of the debate. Chris and I wanted to make sure that innovators and creators and people who had promising ideas and wanted to know how they were going to get it out, we wanted to make sure that this new concept known as the internet could facilitate that. And Chris went to the law books and I said, you know, I don't know everything about the internet. I was dreaming of playing in the NBA as a young guy, never really cracked a book till college, got a scholarship. I wasn't going to make it till the NBA, because at 6'4", I was too small and I made up for it by being really slow. But I had even then a sense that the internet was potentially transformative. And at one point I said to Chris, as he was buried in all the law books, I said, Chris, I don't know everything about the internet, but why in the world would anybody give a few $100 to a small business if they thought they were going to be held personally liable for everything that was posted? And I literally said this to Chris. I said, hey, Chris, I bet there's going to be a lot of postings. So we knew back then, Corynne, that this was going to be potentially useful. I never thought that we would have a book written about our work called The 26 Words That Created the Internet. But what happened was, in the Communications Decency Act, they had really two sections. One was the section on pornography, and the other was the handiwork of Congressman Cox and I. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court struck down the pornography section, and Section 230 really came to be seen, as I said to Fox News, not always the most liberal outlet in the country, that Section 230 now is the single best law for small business innovators, and it is the single best law for free speech.
So I want to pick up on that a little bit in a couple of ways. So one thing is, I want to pick up on what you said about the Me Too movement, because I'm not sure that people really understand how that how that works. And I think what you're getting at there, just as a very practical example, is if you want to post online about an experience that you had, you need a platform that's willing to host that, right? That content so people can read it. But if that platform is worried that what you're saying might be defamatory, right? They're not going to let you post it. They're not going to let you post it until their lawyers vet it and make sure it's perfectly true and all that kind of stuff. And no one's going to do that. Who can pay lawyers to do that research, to do that work? And I think it's a really, it's a perfect example of what we're dealing with here. And of course, if I say something defamatory, if I make an allegation, it's not true, I may be on the hook for it. But a platform shouldn't have to worry about that all the time. And if they do, they just won't exist. We just won't have it. But I think another thing that you said that's really...
Corynne, can I just freeze that for 1 minute? Because you got back to this question that we talked about early on, that this was for people who aren't the folks with the deep pockets. One of the things that makes me angry about the debate about 230, there are a number of things, but the one that really infuriates me is that Section 230 is some kind of windfall for big tech.
Right.
The fact of the matter is big tech's got so much money that they can buy whatever content they want. They can buy themselves out of any kind of legal scrape. And we sure learned that when the first bill to start unraveling Section 230 passed was called Sesta Fosta. And it was about sex trafficking. And we kept saying, you're not going to get this great win against these monsters that are engaged in sex trafficking. They're all going to move to the dark web. Well, that's what happened. But guess what deep pocket sold us out? Facebook. Because Facebook said, hey, let's get some good publicity. We're against sex trafficking. And by the way, we can just buy off anybody we wanted to. So your point, Corynne, about making it clear that this is about those voices without power and clout, not about protecting big tech, is really key.
Right. I 100% agree. And I was actually going to point to that example as well, because one of the things that also happened is that, so one of the things that many people predicted, including EFF, including you, I think, was that it was going to have all kinds of SESTA was going to have cause a lot of collateral damage. It was going to cause people to over-censor. It was going to cause people to silence themselves. And any site that thought they had any risk of liability was going to shut themselves down. And that's exactly what happened. So right after SESTA passed, a bunch of dating sites went out of business, just to pick one example. And guess who started their own dating site? Our friends at Facebook. So, because Facebook can afford to pay the lawyers to handle the risk, but lots and lots of startups and small businesses, they can't do that. Also, not just startups and small businesses, but libraries, newspapers, and little blogs, Ravelry, the knitting site, right? All these places that people don't really think about. I completely agree with you, and that actually leads me to my question about this, because it seems to me that the conversation around Section 230 focuses so much on just a few companies and anger at just a few companies, as if it doesn't protect anything else.
Yeah, the catalyst for Techlash, which is really big Techlash, by the way, clearly was the 2016, election. The companies did a horrendous job, and they didn't deal with misinformation. And basically, the country was looking at them and saying the platforms really didn't do much of anything or fix anything unless it was something else that would make them even more money, help them sell, for example, even more ads than they were. But after the 2016 election, people angry about some of the slime on the internet, which our law provides a tool to get off and to, moderate it. They were looking for answers. And because they thought 230 was the law that just made social media possible, they said, well, if we just threaten to change 230, that'll force the tech companies to pay attention. Unfortunately, a big chunk of the ideas that are being thrown out right now would do more harm than good. And I did want to walk people through that New York Times example, because we all love the New York Times. It's great to get the information, but they had to run a correction saying that the First Amendment, not Section 230, is what protects hate speech online. So right now it's very fashionable to say Section 230 is what props up, hate speech and the like. But the fact is, the First Amendment says government can't regulate what people say are right, except for some very narrow exceptions. So 98% of the garbage people are concerned about on social media, like hate speech and misinformation and misleading videos, is protected by the First Amendment. So you throw 230 in the trash can, as some want to do, it would just take longer in court for websites to win lawsuits over that kind of content, and the small innovator would find it very hard to get out of the garage. So
right.
That's what we're up against.
Because the small innovator can't afford to defend their First Amendment rights. And this is the thing I think is really the other thing that's misunderstood about Section 230. It's not just what it protects, but it's also that it protects moderation. It's actually, if you want companies to do more moderation, Section 230 is part of what protects their ability to do that. And I just think that's something that people really don't understand. It's sort of, if it wasn't for Section 230, then one thing that could happen is you'd actually have less speech taken down. So if you're somebody who actually is worried about offensive content, you should be very happy with Section 230 instead of objecting to it. I want to get to questions, and we're going to do that in about 5-10 more minutes. But before we do that, I kind of want to say I think we've spent some time talking about some of the complaints and that we're worried about and the misinformation. But I think that probably we could agree that there is a bit of a problem. We have a problem in the sense that you do have a few companies that have an awful lot of power over online speech as a practical matter. Now, legally, they have First Amendment rights. All those things are true. But it's worrisome that we have just a few companies that seem to really have an outsized influence on what is online and what isn't online. And that's just a reality. And I wonder if you have thoughts about, if we don't want to be focusing, we think Section 230 is the wrong focus, if that's what you're worried about. What are some better things that we could be encouraging Congress to do, that we could have been encouraging companies to do, if to sort of address this problem?
Well, the first thing we ought to do is tackle the incredible abuses in the privacy area. Every other week in this country, Americans learn about what amounts to yet another privacy disaster. And it's kind of lather, rinse, and repeat. The company apologizes, it promises to do better, and then like clockwork, it happens all over again. I'm going to introduce a piece of legislation very soon called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale. And this is yet another area we ought to be focused on, because we all see these commercial databases selling our location data and all kinds of other things. And the apps and the data brokers really ought to be reined in here. So to me, the first thing we ought to do coming up is take steps to protect the privacy of Americans. By the way, we got Facebook and Jack Dorsey to say, when I asked him a question in an open intelligence hearing, was individual privacy a national security issue? And both of them finally answered yes, which is an indication of its importance. And to me, if you want to get tough with big tech, you ought to get behind my bill called the Mind Your Own Business Act. which would require personal consequences for executives like Mark Zuckerberg who lie to the federal government about their privacy policy. They could be held personally accountable. So which would you think makes more sense? Passing mind your own business to protect millions of Americans, or go out and pass, I think you said you had Lindsey Graham, or you were watching Lindsey Graham. That Earn It Act is more of the same as SESTA FOSTA. Exactly the same thing. And it's going to sound good, but the sexual monsters will be, I think, flourishing, under it. And if you want to go after the monsters, as I do, you ought to pass my legislation to provide more resources to prosecute them.
It seems to me that one thing that's, if you're really trying to go after big tech, you should ask yourself a few questions when big tech comes out in support of your bill, which is what we saw with SESTA FOSTA. And another thing that I see over and over, I keep seeing the executives from these big companies being brought in to answer questions. Now, that's fine. I have no problem with calling them on the carpet. But I would really love it if, when we're making technology policy, if we brought in all of the other people who are going to be affected by these laws. And sort of comes back to how Section 230, protects so many different kinds of services. But when we have hearings on Section 230 reform, we don't talk to all those other people. We just talk to, and we ask Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg what they think. And again, not saying we shouldn't hear from them, but I want us to be hearing from other folks. And I think that if we heard from other folks, one thing, I think the legislation you're suggesting sounds exciting. Protecting privacy is really important. A couple other things I think we could think about are looking at ways to promote competition, because one of the things that happens is that we have to worry a lot more about the choices that Facebook makes, or Twitter makes, or YouTube makes, because we don't have enough alternatives, right? And so maybe we should reduce the amount of power that they have over our speech by thinking about ways to foster alternatives. And there are alternatives out there, but I think not enough. And that's the thing we think about a lot at EFF. And also, what can we do to encourage companies to develop tools to put users in control of their privacy, for sure, but also of their own internet experience. I think if they put a fraction of the money that they're investing in content moderation in developing user tools so we can make our own decisions, I think that would be pretty exciting. Another thing that we work on at EFF is, when you have companies that have a lot of power over speech, they know they're going to make mistakes. We know they're going to make mistakes. So one thing that I don't think this is something that should be legislated, but rather be voluntary, is committing to providing real due process for their users, or kind of due process, the ability to appeal, and maybe just a little bit more transparency into what they're up to, which would be great.
That's too logical.
That's hard. One of the things that's actually can be valuable about the hearings, I think, is you all have the power to ask them questions that ordinary users can't get answers to. Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Corynne, before we go to questions, let me just make one last point, because I know we're about ready to go there. Look, I have never said that Section 230 or any law is perfect. There's not a law that you can't come up with better ways to proceed to get the results that are in the public interest. I do think states could be given more leeway to enforce state laws that are similar to federal laws. I'm very concerned about what we're hearing from civil rights groups about discrimination online, particularly violations of fair housing laws. Part of the problem has been that we've had so much, as I call it, bloviating about 230, where we've had to run around and kind of figure out how to deal with all this hot air. We haven't even, I think, had a chance to analyze whether the problem with respect to housing is a failure of enforcement at the FTC or the Department of Justice, or if new laws are needed to address the problem. So on the proposition, I think this is what you're saying as well. There ought to be some basic fact finding before the Congress just jumps in to making sweeping changes in speech, online. I remember when I got started and people in Congress were saying the internet's a series of tubes, and people weren't sure how platforms made money and things like that. Let's make sure people really understand what's at issue here.
Yeah, I think that that's completely true. And especially, we need that fact finding so that we really make smart technology policy. I think that given how important, I actually really continue to think that people underestimate just how important Section 230 is and just how risky it is when you mess with it. And I think our experience with SESTA, which was an important and big change, but smaller than some of the changes that I've been hearing about. And we saw that cause so much collateral damage. It really should be a cautionary tale. And one of the things I know has been proposed has been actually fact-finding into the effects of SESTA, into the effects of SESTA-FOSTA. It does seem to me that maybe we could see how that turned out before we mess around with the law anymore. So I think you and I are, as we say often at EFF, in violent agreement on this question. I think now I want to bring in the audience because I think there's a whole bunch of people who have lots of questions for us.
Corynne, I'm afraid people might be losing some of the important comments you're making. So let's see what happens with it. I'm losing a little bit on my end, not too much. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just saying that I was going to now move into opening up for questions.
Good.
From the users. So we have, let's see. So one question I have already is this. A question from one of our audience members is, if a person chooses to retweet, is that the same as a blog platform allowing someone to post a blog entry so that both are protected? I think the question is an audience member trying to understand a little bit better, how does Section 230 simultaneously protect users who are retweeting something and Twitter itself?
Well, I think we're going to have to work through all of those issues going forward. So I'd probably put it back on our questioner what they would like to see be the policy in this area.
But I think that's fair. But I also think that what we're trying to get at is the notion behind Section 230 and what its fundamental protections are when it comes to online speech, you are not responsible for what someone else says. Whether you're a platform or you're someone who's just forwarding an email, it's not on you to be responsible for what the original person is saying. That person, though, can be held responsible and should be, in appropriate circumstances.
I think I would generally go along with that view. I'm not sure I'm ready to make it an across the board principle. And maybe I should have done this before we got to questions. To have a serious discussion here, we really ought to use two measures. These are the measures that I'm focused on. The first is the change going to get in the way of constitutionally protected speech? That's kind of principle number one. And second, is it going to discourage moderation? So every bill I've seen on 230 violates one or both of these tenets. I think your point about if you're retweeting somebody else's, comment, it's still all free speech, strikes me as still free speech. But I'm going to want to sit down and kind of think about some of the examples of what might be retweeted.
Right. I do think that some of the proposals that I've seen seem to me really would fundamentally violate the First Amendment in many ways. But certainly in the basic thing of interfering with the ability of companies to make their own decisions about what speech they host. And it surprises me a lot that people would want that so very much. It seems to me that our tradition would be to be hands off on that kind of thing.
Ask our caller who wondered about the legal protection for retweeting what he or she was thinking.
Is there a way that we can do that?
They can't.
Okay. Our moderators say we will get that in a minute.
Yeah, good. That's what I meant. Good.
Okay. So give me a second. Let's see. So we have another question that says, what are your thoughts on the YouTube announcement this week that it would take down any discussion on election fraud? I think actually what I heard this morning was that YouTube announced that it would take down content alleging widespread election.
That was it. That is why I think it is very much in line with the spirit of 230. If we're talking about widespread election fraud, where clearly even Bill Barr and others have said they haven't been able to prove it, I think that's exactly the kind of information that the public deserves to have put in context, and people could take it down.
So the related question from that same person is concern about Twitter, what they're calling Twitter's censorship of conservative voices. And the questioner is saying, as a Democrat, I don't agree about censoring things I don't agree with or preventing the ability to share and discuss ideas. And I'm worried that to paraphrase, I'm worried that 230 is being exploited.
Hey, Corynne, on that point, I really want to spend some time because we have watched, as I say, a lot of my colleagues in the Senate just sort of make stuff up. For example, my colleague said, do you know Section 230 requires neutrality? There's not a single word in Section 230 that requires neutrality. And then when they couldn't prove that it required neutrality, they went on to the point that you're talking about, which is that somehow social media is wildly against conservative voices. That too is just factual baloney, because a lot of days I look at the postings, and usually on a typical day, the conservative voices are outnumbering the liberal or moderate voices by 3-1. I mean, it's not like a close call. It's not like 55-45, 52-41. It's, like 3-1 conservative voices over other kind of voices. And let's be clear about the voices that really get attention. The voices that get attention in social media are voices that make money. That's what drives it, not philosophy, it's money, period.
I think that there has been what we have seen at EFF is the research doesn't suggest partisanship on behalf of any of the platforms. And there's some research actually that suggests that alternative or progressive voices actually get shut down more. So I think I want to hit on another thing though, because I do think that's right. I do think there's another point of confusion around Section 230 that you only get protections if you're neutral. And that somehow and this again takes us back to social media companies, but we again have to remember it's not just them, it's also Ravelry.com, that if you're not neutral in your moderation decisions, somehow you should lose the protection.
Can I address that? Is that what you were asking me to address it?
Yeah, please.
You can go back and see comments that we made early on about what the point of the law was, what Chris Cox and I said. The point was essentially to let lots of flowers bloom. If you want to have a conservative platform, more power to you. More power to you to be able to talk about conservative ideas and conservative issues and conservative politics. It's your baby. If you want to have a progressive platform, more power to you. Same thing, your baby. Look at those voices. Make sure that you have a chance to have principles and ideas from progressive sources that you'd like to have get out. So the fact is that this whole question of neutrality, it is not in the statute. There's not a single word in Section 230 that even resembles the notion of building in neutrality. So that's number one. Number two, if you look just numerically at posts on a typical day, the conservatives outnumber the liberals something like 3-1. And third, the whole point of the law, Corynne, I guess we're wrapping up in a second because my staff looks like they may be taking me to something, so we can get in a couple more maybe. But the whole point of 230 was to let a lot of flowers bloom. And if we have somebody who's listening today who wants to set up a conservative website, I want to let them have every opportunity to do it, to enjoy the protections of constitutionally protected speech and the right to moderate, just like people who have political views 180 degrees the other way.
Right. Okay. Just real quick, there was two questions. One is a person was very sad about the loss of Craigslist personal ads after SESTA passed, and they're wondering if there's anything we could do about that. And I just want to hit that one very quickly to say there actually is something that EFF is trying to do about that, which is that we are representing a host of organizations in challenging SESTA FOSTA as unconstitutional. So, fingers crossed, hold tight, and if we're successful, then we will see those personal ads come back again because we will have gotten rid of this unconstitutional law.
And the reality, Corynne, is in a number of jurisdictions, and we have this data, essentially sex trafficking actually went up. And I always felt that if you were given a choice between having something that was transparent and out in the open, or you'd have something that would move to the dark web, and we all know what we're talking about with the dark web, some place where you can't get with a search engine, then without a search engine, that these questions are going to be increasingly ones where the Congress spends time on stuff that sounds good, but really ends up, like in sex trafficking, driving everything to the dark web, increasing it in jurisdictions. And by the way, I think Earn It, which is the Graham bill, which is sort of a successor to SESTA FOSTA, will do exactly the same thing. It'll make it harder for us to catch these monsters that are exploiting children. And I've made it clear to members of Congress and prosecutors, hey, if you're serious about the problem, get behind my legislation that actually provides resources to do something about it, rather than pass something that sounds good but doesn't do anything.
Well, that's a perfect segue to what I think has to be the last question for us here, which is, okay, so we think, in this coming year, there's just a real growing consensus that something is going to happen with Section 230, or a lot of push to change it one way or another. What can our audience, what can people do about that to make sure that either the changes don't happen or that they don't undermine the core purpose of the legislation? I can tell you one thing you can do is follow EFF, because we will be fighting to make sure that we don't undermine Section 230 in ways that ruin the internet. That's sort of core to our values, and I know it's core to your values as well, Senator Wyden. So tell our audience, what can they do?
Well, what I hope they'll do first is think about some of the core things we've talked about tonight. And, you always try to kind of recap it a little bit. When you get a piece of legislation in front of you that sounds good, ask, what does it do to constitutionally protected speech? Ask, what does it do to moderation? What is it going to do to the people who don't have deep pockets, the Me Too movement, of the Black Lives Matter folks? what is it going to do when most speech is protected by the First Amendment? 98% of what people hate so much is protected by the First Amendment. So why would you want to take away a tool that is so helpful to people without power and clout and helps you to moderate some of the garbage? So what we're going to do is sort of build out a checklist. I just gave you, I think, 4 or 5 kind of elements, and EFF has done it as well. That's what people should do anytime a proposal comes up, and anytime they're faced with, oh, well, of course I hate sex trafficking. We all hate sex trafficking. And the reason that I introduced the bill to provide help for prosecutors and investigators is I said, hey, you got a choice. You can do something that basically follows up on SESTA and FOSTA, which has already been a mess, or you can do something that we should have done years ago, which is to put real resources into prosecution and have a deterrent. And so much of this, my friend Nick Kristof, he's from Oregon, wrote a really powerful story about Pornhub, recently. And one of the things that I point out is Section 230 doesn't provide any protection for federal crimes, and hosting child pornography is definitely a federal crime. So let's get out the point that 230 sure as hell doesn't provide any protections for grotesque crimes like Nick Kristof was writing about.
Right. Well, it reminds me that, SESTA FOSTA, one of the things that was very focused on was a company called Backpage. And in fact, federal prosecutors went after Backpage just fine without any needs for any changes to Section 230.
And to give you how much the Congress gets swept up in this bloviating, senator after senator went to the floor of the United States Senate and said, if we're going to deal with sex trafficking, by God, we've got to have this SESTA FOSTA thing to deal with Backpage. And then I pointed out to a bunch of them that Backpage got busted not with SESTA FOSTA, but with existing law, which I want to use those principles for to get more prosecutors.
Excellent. Well, I think that is a solid way to end this. I want to say, for those of you who care about Section 230, please do follow EFF. Please also follow Senator Wyden. Follow him on Twitter. Sign up for his newsletter. He is always at the forefront on digital rights, just like EFF is. So if you keep up with us, you will know what's going on, and you will also know when you can take action, which is really, very important. So thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Wyden.
A lot of fun. To be continued.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to hand this back to Aaron Jew, and he will bring us on out. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Corynne and Senator Wyden, for joining us. There is so much to say about Section 230, and luckily, Section 230, that is exactly what it's for. It's for your ability to speak your mind without censorship on the internet. So there is no doubt that the way that we handle Section 230 will have profound effects on free speech and the shape of the internet for generations. So to learn more, check out EFF.org/CDA230. Thanks to everyone for watching today. For 30 years, EFF's fight for your rights online has been powered by people just like you around the world, and we can sure use your support. If you can help out, go to EFF.org/30 to become a member. Thanks again for participating in our Fireside chat today, and we'll see you next time.